Hey there.
Hi.
It is an unseasonably warm day.
It is, which could possibly be why I lost power just as I was about to log in and join you.
Well, I'm glad you got it back. There are all these weather warnings for like wildfires and maritime warnings and everything, just due to the unseasonably warm weather. So who knows?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's supposed to get up to 80 degrees here today.
which is insane. Yeah,
It's March for
it's
those
late March.
listening.
It's almost April, but yeah, it's still too early for it
It's
to
the
be.
last Saturday in March.
Yes.
And
Uh,
I appreciate that my power company is fast at
yeah,
taking care of these things. They had given the restoration as 6 o'clock. We start recording at 4.
yeah.
So we almost rescheduled. And
Yeah.
I was about to say, it could be that it takes until 6 o'clock. Knowing my power company, it could be 10 minutes from now, or it could be 6 o'clock.
It
And
was.
it turned out to be 10 minutes from now,
Yep. Yep. I love it.
which makes them look good. And I
Yeah, my
appreciate
power company is not as responsive.
it. But no, Con Ed kind of sucks.
Yes. Well, welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes. This is a podcast about the Granada Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994, and ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I'm Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
And today we're looking at episode 11 in the series, which is called The Resident Patient.
The story was first published in the Strand magazine in 1893.
So I've been reading Bending the Willow by David Stewart Davis, who's a massive Sherlockian. He's written a lot of Holmes and Watson adventures himself. The latest of which came out in 2022. This book is, God, when was it published? It was published after Brett had died, but it contains a lot of interviews with him and also with everybody else associated with the Granada production. So there are lots and lots of anecdotes and a ton of information about how the series was filmed.
Mm-hmm.
So I was noticing as the opening credits are rolling and we're on this busy London street. Obviously it's a set. It's actually in Manchester, where Granada was headquartered.
Oh.
And yeah, the set production was quite expensive.
Oh, I bet. It looks like it.
I know, doesn't it? It's lavish. And as the series went on and the set got more and more worn in, it was even convincing to Jeremy Brett that he was on this London street or, in 221B. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
So we open this episode in a bedroom where a mustached man is sleeping, and he's awakened by a voice calling, "Sutton, help me, Sutton." And he gets up and he grabs his robe and he goes downstairs as the voice is getting louder. In the front hall is a coffin, which is guarded by like this undertaker looking kind of guy.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a funeral parlor, but in case you were wondering what might be going on, the subtitles hopefully give the name of the music that is playing right now.
Yes.
Sutton's Nightmare.
Yes. So this grim looking lurchy kind of guy in deep mourning has this threatening stare. And as the voice continues, the mourning guy begins to smile and gestures to the coffin. And it's all very threatening. And we see that it's surrounded by additional mourners. They're all veiled, so we can't see their faces. And it's clear that the voice is coming from inside the coffin. So, yeah, it's really unnerving. And the man approaches and opens the coffin, and it's his own body inside. So he understandably freaks out. He runs upstairs to his bedroom. He locks it, and the voice is now coming from his own bed. And he turns around to see himself in the bed. At which point he wakes up sweating because it was all.
That does sound like that last part sounds like a very tricky nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you cannot get away from. Yeah. Back in London, Watson's getting a shave, and Holmes is next to him at the barbershop, and he's tapping furiously on the arm of the chair.
Violently drumming his fingers in the armchair. 2 seconds of that, and I'm ready to duct
I
tape
know, I
his
was like,
hand to the chair.
I want to slap him. You mustn't take it so badly, Holmes, Watson says. And he says Holmes is boiling with indignation. And Holmes is all, whatever do you mean? And it turns out Mrs. Hudson is spring cleaning. And the pair have been ejected from 221B while that's going on. And Holmes says, however, did you deduce that? And Watson says, well, you're at the barbershop, not getting a shave or a haircut. Holmes shaves himself. He doesn't need a haircut for another 2 weeks. Watson also points out that he left 221B in a hurry because he doesn't have his gloves or his cane.
And Holmes glances down at his hands like, no, I'm wearing, oh shit. I
And he is wearing a hat. It's kind of a trilby-like hat. It's unlike the usual top hat or deerstalker that he normally wears. Mrs. Hudson is anxious to extend the spring cleaning to Holmes and Watson's apartment, and Holmes has been sitting in the barbershop extremely peeved. And you cannot deny that I am right, Watson says. But
of course I can. Watch me.
Holmes pulls a packet out from his jacket pocket. I am here to consult the barber as to this specimen of hair found at the scene of a bloody misadventure last Tuesday in Deptford. And Watson protests at this because obviously Holmes is pissed at something.
Yes.
But then Holmes, his expression is incredible here. He's all smiles. And he says, what you have perceived is the most intense and tranquil enjoyment.
Yes, you look like you were very much enjoying yourself.
As we're pounding on the arm of the chair. He says he was remembering the concert they went to last night, and his fingers were drumming on the chair because he was remembering the violinist's fingering, and the irritation was because he couldn't figure out the fingering himself.
And he spreads his arms like, this is so obvious, Watson.
But he says there is an element of truth in what Watson says, at which point, and I don't blame him a bit, Watson whirls around all like, ha!
And they both laugh.
Yeah.
It's cute.
On their way back to 221B, they see a carriage parked outside.
Yeah, and they are arm in arm on their way back to
very sweet.
221B.
Yes.
Which was not unusual among heterosexual men in Victorian times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, there wasn't really such a thing as heterosexual or homosexual, like at that point. So between the two of them, this is also a very cute scene. They deduce that the carriage belongs to a doctor who's relatively new. He's a general practitioner, and turns out he's waiting for them in their newly cleaned apartment as Mrs. Hudson is finishing up.
And the soundtrack is playing Beethoven's Violin Concerto, Third Movement, which was what Holmes said he was trying to recollect from the concert last night.
Yes, and it will come back into play later in the episode. So this guy is a young man named Percy Trevelyan. Watson happens to know his work. He's the author of a monograph on obscure lesions. Trevelyan is pleasantly surprised. He thought nobody had read it. It hasn't sold. And he and Watson chit-chat a bit about medicine while Holmes lights his pipe.
And looks bored by the medical talk.
Exactly. And the pipe is this long-stemmed model. He's got a bunch of pipes, but this one is called a church warden, which I thought was interesting. And the annotated points out that the reason Watson knows his work is because he's boning up himself. Like he's trying to stay current. And then Trevelyan gets to the point. He says he's got to practice at Brook Street. Something happened last night. He needs Holmes's help before he can do anything else. And Holmes asks for a detailed account. So we get the story.
We get quite the detailed account.
Yes. So Trevelyan went to London University. He was an excellent student, but he didn't have the money necessary to set up his own practice and get good accommodations. And Watson is very sympathetic.
Yeah, he says he had to go into the army because of lack of funds for setting up practice.
Exactly. And this was something that Conan Doyle struggled with as well.
Right. Yeah, this is part of why he ended up writing stories. There were no patients
to fund
he was doing this to pass the time.
And 2 years ago, Trevelyan received a visit from a man named Blessington, who he'd never met before. And Blessington, we see him entering Trevelyan's practice. It's a one-room kind of dump. Trevelyan's bundled up in a shawl and fingerless gloves.
Isn't it by a factory as well? There were like factory noises.
And he's huddled up against this heater, which, is like spewing coal smoke into the room. And we see that Blessington is the same man from the opening scene who had the nightmare. He's extremely well dressed. He's obviously
he looks like the Monopoly man, actually.
He does, yes. And I love the silk on his suit and his cravat. It's wonderful. And he can't believe that someone of Trevelyan's reputation is situated in this cold, squalid room. And Blessington says, "You clearly have all the cleverness that makes for a successful man, but have you the tact?" And Trevelyan, he's got his hackles up a little. He says, "I trust I have my share."
He says tactfully.
Yes. Any bad habits? Not drawn to a drink? And Trevelyan takes offense at this. And Blessington says, "Quite right."
Well, he says, "No, really, sir," which I would like to point out is not an answer.
And then he offers to start Trevelyan at Brook Street. So Brook Street at the time, like Harley Street since like the 1960s, is noted at the time for being the address of doctors and specialists. It's right by Grosvenor Square. It's a really posh neighborhood. George Frederick Handel used to live on Brook Street.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so it is the place to be and set up if you're a doctor in, the Victorian times. And Blessington's offering it all to Trevelyan: servants, a carriage, the best equipment money can buy, new clothes, the whole business.
Yeah, furniture, maids, and 3/4 of everything he earns.
Well, yeah, that's it. Trevelyan asks why, and Blessington says it's just like any other investment. It's, in fact, safer than most. And Blessington says he's going to run the house, pay the maids, take care of everything. Trevelyan's job is to, quote unquote, wear out the chair in your consulting room. And yeah, he's offering a 75-25 split with most of them.
He doesn't just look like the Monopoly man. He is the Monopoly.
Yes. But Trevelyan's in no position to disagree with this proposal.
Right. Yeah. Trevelyan's like, if I wasn't so desperate, I would spit in your face. So sounds great.
And the 25% is much more than he's making now.
Yes.
So he moves into Brook Street, which is lavishly decorated, expensive paintings, furniture. Blessington's showing him around. He's got a waiting room, a consulting room. And as they walk around, they pass through the front hall that was in the nightmare. It's the same house. And Blessington himself has taken rooms in the house and lives there as a resident patient, hence the title.
Yeah, he's basically a hypochondriac.
Yes. Trevelyan says he's got a weak but not abnormal heart and demands constant medical supervision. He keeps himself to himself. He rarely goes out. He's got no visitors, except he takes a 30-minute walk every night, no matter what the weather.
He's going for his 10,000 steps a day.
In 30 minutes, that's going to get him far. After that, he meets with Trevelyan every night, and they split the proceeds for the day.
He says that Blessington gives him 5 and 3pence for every guinea. A guinea is a pound and a shilling. There are 20 shillings to a pound. And for those curious, there's also 12 pennies to a shilling. 5 shillings and 3 pennies. A pound is worth 164 pounds today. So for every 164 pounds he earns in today's money, he gets to keep 41, and Blessington takes the rest.
It's not a lot, but money's different now than it used to be.
Yes. And he doesn't really have bills.
No, he has no expenses. So Blessington takes his portion to his room in a strong box, and we see he's got this big trunk that's got a lot of strong boxes in it and stock certificates and bags of presumably money. The business has been a success, and Trevelyan has made Blessington a rich man. But some weeks ago, Blessington comes down to Trevelyan's office in a state of agitation. He's waving a newspaper and yelling about a burglary, apparently nearby, but it could have been at their house, I guess. And Blessington installs bars and locks and gates all over the doors and the windows of the house.
Yeah, he asks the workman if he's sure it's strong enough. The workman says, "Oh, it's strong enough for the Bank of England." Blessington looks at him like, "Yeah, about that. I'm going to need them a bit stronger."
So when Trevelyan's questioning him, Blessington is so offended that Trevelyan just shut up. He thought it was about the fortune in Blessington's room, but he came to suspect that Blessington was afraid for his life. He stops going out. He locks himself in his room. He remains in a state of mortal dread. And we see Blessington still clutching the newspaper, lying on his bed, sweating and trembling. So this account has taken all afternoon.
Yeah, it's gone from bright sunlight to dark and rainy outside. Yes. 221B.
and Watson's closing the blinds. Trevelyan has apparently captivated Holmes, like, with this story. And Holmes clarifies that Trevelyan had found Blessington on his bed with the newspaper, but Trevelyan corrects him and says it's the remains of a newspaper because it had been torn to shreds. And this is of great interest to Holmes, although Trevelyan doesn't know what the newspaper contained to upset Blessington so much. And Trevelyan says that as time passed, Blessington's fears appeared to die away, and he resumes his former habits. He takes his walk every evening and meets with Trevelyan afterwards to settle the books. But yesterday, Trevelyan receives a letter from a Russian aristocrat with catalepsy, which is...
Catalepsy involves rigid muscles, like the patient is unable to move. And apparently less sensitivity to pain. I do not want to think how that was discovered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it could be a symptom of a lot of things.
And so this guy is coming to his practice at 6:15, which is when Blessington is out taking his evening constitutional. The man arrives. He's a very severe, stern-looking guy with like this hatchet face, and he's accompanied by his son. But the son refuses to go into the consultation room because he says, if he sees his father in one of those seizures, I am convinced I would never survive it.
The son, by the way, is there because his father speaks very little English. So that's why he's come. If I were Trevelyan, I'd be like, okay, how am I supposed to have a consultation with your dad if he doesn't speak English and you're waiting out here in the waiting room? No, you come in or both of you are going to leave.
Right. But the son waits in the waiting room where there are all these newspapers and magazines laid out on a table like modern waiting rooms. Trevelyan begins the consultation with some difficulty because of the language differences.
He starts out asking the father's age, the Russian nobleman's age, and without hesitation, the man says, 67. Yeah. I'm sorry, why did you need a translator? Why is your son here? I just need to go check on your son for a minute, make sure he's still in the waiting room and not roaming around the house.
And the man also says he smokes cigars, and Trevelyan asks, do you drink? And the man goes, vodka.
Yeah, there's a moment of confusion on his face, and like then he remembers he's supposed to be Russian. Vodka. Yes. And he's really inconsistent on what he understands and doesn't understand. Like, sorry, Duolingo didn't cover. Do you have any pain? But he has no trouble understanding. Do you smoke cigars?
Right. Right. And then the interview stops because the nobleman has gone into a seizure. And Trevelyan notes... And
by seizure, he's frozen.
Yeah, he's frozen, solid, staring straight ahead. And Trevelyan notes that this is typical, and it's usually treated with amyl nitrate, or, as we know them today, poppers.
Various things it's used for, but I think in this case, he intends to use it as a muscle relaxant.
Yes. So he goes to get some, but he comes back to find both father and son are gone, and the son's newspaper is strewn on the floor. So he summons his servant, the hall page Fenton, and asks if he saw them leave, but Fenton says he didn't. And at this point, Blessington comes back from his walk. He pops in to say hello to Trevelyan. Trevelyan continues scolding Fenton for letting the Russians go mid-consultation, but then he's rousted from his desk because Blessington is yelling for him upstairs. Someone has been in my room. And Trevelyan says that's not true, but Blessington accuses him of lying. He's
Yeah,
really
Trevelyan's like, no one has been in your room. Oh, impatient, despite his having lost a patient and son somewhere in the house.
yeah, exactly. And Trevelyan's standing his ground, but Blessington like get upstairs, and there are large muddy footprints on his carpet. Nothing has been stolen, but Blessington is absolutely irate because his privacy has been violated, and he begins to cry.
Sits on the bed and starts to cry. Go away and leave me alone. I want to hug him.
And yeah, Trevelyan wants to help him. He asks what he can do, and Blessington sends him to Holmes. And Holmes asks, did he ask for me by name? And when Trevelyan says yes, Holmes says, then let us be on our way. And he bolts out of his chair. So back at Brook Street, they all pile their wet hats and umbrellas on poor Fenton in the hallway. He's got to be sopping wet by the time they're done. They head towards the stairs when suddenly all the lights go out and Blessington is shouting that he has a pistol and he will shoot.
Yeah, it looked like electric lighting to me, so I was curious when electric lighting came to London. Electric street lighting began in London in 1878 and for homes in 1891. So given Blessington, well, this was almost certainly electric light.
Which makes sense because it kind of goes on and off with one switch.
Yeah.
Trevelyan's furious. He's indignantly introducing Holmes and Watson and reminding Blessington that their presence in his house was his idea. And Blessington apologizes and he turns on the lights. And we see that Holmes is already at work with measuring tape on the carpet. And I noticed Blessington is just such a sweaty mess.
Yeah.
He's very, very moist. Holmes asks Blessington if he knew the two men, and Blessington's all, what two men? And Holmes says, the ones who invaded your room. And Blessington yells at them to come into his room. He unlocks his trunk. He shows them his fortune. He says he doesn't like bankers. So, of course, he's disturbed when someone comes into the room where the money is. And Holmes says he can't help Blessington if he's going to deceive him. And he starts to leave. And Blessington asks, no advice for me? And Holmes says, my advice to you is to speak the truth. And he runs downstairs with Watson in pursuit.
And Blessington is left to contemplate his life choices.
Yes. Holmes is convinced that Blessington knows who the men are who invaded the room. Back at 221B, he tells Watson that the young Russian went into Blessington's room while the older man kept Trevelyan from interfering. Watson says, and this is hilarious, Watson says, catalepsy is very easy to imitate. And Holmes tosses back, yes, I know, I've done it myself. So Watson asks Holmes if Trevelyan could be making all of this up, trespassing in Blessington's room himself. But Holmes says the footprints are all wrong. They don't measure up.
They don't match the style of Trevelyan's shoes.
Yeah. And they go to bed. The next morning at Brook Street, Nora the maid is bringing tea around to both Trevelyan and Blessington in their separate rooms. She knocks on Blessington's door, but it's already open. She goes inside. She screams because Blessington has hanged himself. At 221B, Watson is snoring in bed. And I love this.
There's a big model ship in his room.
Exactly. Yes. He's building this model ship. I guess he does that while Holmes is experimenting. Holmes very gently approaches the bed and taps Watson on the shoulder. It's not a rude awakening.
Yes.
And he says, get dressed quickly. There's a cab waiting for us. And he hands Watson a telegram and leaves. And the telegram says, for God's sake, come at once, P. Trevelyan. And Trevelyan greets them in a panic before they can even get out of the cab and tells them
that it's not that elegant closed carriage cab. It's a handsome cab, two wheels, open front. The driver's in a raised seat on the back of the carriage.
Yep. And he tells them that Blessington has committed suicide. And
Holmes whistles.
He whistles. Yes.
Oh, okay. That's not a typical Holmesian reaction, but okay.
No, and I don't think I've ever heard him whistle before or since.
Yeah, it was very surprising.
A weird choice by Jeremy Brett.
Or the director.
Or the director, or both. So they go inside, and they're shucking their gloves and hats, but Fenton's not there. Holmes asks if the body's been touched. Trevelyan says no. Holmes asks where Fenton is, because who else is going to take the hats and gloves? And Trevelyan says he's nowhere to be found.
Did you like pile the stuff on the floor?
And as they go upstairs, we see Nora the maid sobbing at a policeman who's making notes. In the bedroom, Inspector Lanner is on the scene, and he asks Holmes to take a look because they were just about to take Blessington down. And Holmes helps them take him down, and they cover him with a sheet. Lanner says that suicides are common at 5 a.m.
There has been recent research that more or less backs this up. Suicidal thoughts are most common between 4 and 5 a.m.
And that was about the time that Blessington hanged himself. Watson says from the rigor mortis, he's been dead about 3 hours.
Yeah, rigor mortis starts to appear roughly 2 hours after death.
So it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. So Holmes asks Lanner if he noticed anything unusual in the room. And Lanner says there's a screwdriver on the mantle, and Blessington was smoking heavily throughout the night. He's got, there are cigar stubs in the fireplace. Holmes asks about the cigar holder, and Lanner says he didn't find one, but his cigar case was in his coat pocket, and he hands it to Holmes. Holmes opens it, takes out a cigar, smells it, says it's a Havana, but the stubs are not. They're Dutch East Indian, which probably is like Aruba or someplace. Some of the stubs have been smoked with a holder and some without. Some had their ends cut off with a dull knife. The others have their ends bitten off by a set of very excellent teeth. And he concludes there were...
I don't suppose you read my monograph on cigars and cigar ash.
Yes.
No, none of us.
And he concludes that there were 3 men there last night. And Lanner's amazed. There's nothing that's been stolen. Holmes tells him the men came through the front door. Lanner says the door was barred that morning, but Holmes said it was barred after the men had left. And Lanner asks how he knows that, and Holmes says, I saw their traces. And then he begins sleuthing around the room. And there's a paragraph in Bending the Willow about this specific scene, where he says Brett was particularly proud of the scene where he examines the patient's room, picking up all the clues without saying a word. It is a remarkable scene, especially for modern television, having no dialogue for 2.5 minutes. And it does epitomize the essence of Sherlock Holmes's minute investigation of a scene of a crime. All those passages that Conan Doyle created describing his detective crawling on the floor, inspecting paintwork with his lens, scraping up dust or ash for analysis. It's all crystallized in this sequence, and Jeremy Brett knew it.
Oh,
yeah. So he does all of that. He's crawling around on the floor. He's scraping up ash. He's handing all the evidence to Lanner as he's finding it. He draws a circle around some muddy footprints by the bed. He examines the screwdriver on the mantle, and he scrapes through the hearth, poking around the ashes, where he finds some extremely large screws buried under the ash.
yeah.
And then he says, the actual facts are simple, and I have no doubt by this afternoon I can give you the reasons for them all as well. And Watson says, basically, can't you tell us something now?
Holmes looks genuinely surprised that they haven't been following along with him.
Exactly. He says, there were 3 men, 1 old, 1 young, and 1 who he doesn't know. The first 2 are the Russians, who were admitted by a Confederate inside the house, presumably Fenton. They went through the hall, up the stairs, jimmied open Blessington's locked door. They then gagged Blessington, tied him up, and then he says a consultation of some sort was held, probably in the nature of a judicial proceeding. And he says it must have... yeah. He says it must have lasted a while because that's when all the cigars were smoked. It's
also a bit of a leap.
I know, yes. And he's situating them all around the room. He knows who sat where, and says once they finished deliberating, they hanged Blessington, watching as he slowly died. And all of this is played out in the episode. Holmes is convinced it was a revenge ritual. And he knows this because the screwdriver and the screws were there to fix up the gallows. But when they saw the chandelier hook embedded in the ceiling, they decided to use that instead. So he instructs
They
Lanning.
tossed iron into the fireplace.
Yeah, they're dumb.
Burn.
But a lot of criminals are dumb. He instructs Lanning to find and arrest Fenton and says he'll be back at 3.
What? Hi, Holmes. Would you like to tell me what I'm arresting him for? On what evidence?
Lanning doesn't even need to know that. He's just going to do what Holmes says.
It's like the blue carbuncle. This man is innocent. Oh, okay. We can let him
We'll
out.
take your word for
Like
it.
Holmes says it. It's fine.
So back at 221B, Holmes is destroying Mrs. Hudson's spring cleaning.
Papers
Everywhere. Oh my God. He's turning the room upside down. Watson asks what he's looking for.
I love this scene.
I do too, yes. Holmes says, Worthington, Worthington, March 1880, I'm sure. And Watson just goes to the desk and takes out some files and finds exactly what Holmes is looking for.
January, February, March. Any good?
David Burke is actually really good in that scene.
Yeah.
There's a newspaper article in this file with the headline, Capture of Worthington Bank Robbers. And at the top of the page is a picture of Sutton, or Blessington, as we now know him. And they dash out of Holmes's room, encounter Mrs. Hudson on the stairs. She's complimenting Watson on his model boat.
And Watson's like, oh, thank you so much. I have to leave right now. Bye.
Yes, he really wants to get away from her. And she enters the room and she starts screaming in horror.
Which is appropriate. Like literally every surface is covered in papers.
Yeah. So it's even worse than when she went through the spring cleaning the first time.
Yes.
Back at Brook Street, Lanner says they found Fenton in a bar and arrested him. Holmes shows Lanner the newspaper clipping of the Worthington Bank gang, as they're called, and Lanner is satisfied, but Trevelyan needs the recap. So Holmes tells him, and we can see from the picture in the paper, there were 5 men in the gang, the 3 who visited Blessington himself, and a 5th man named Cartwright. And we see a scene of them all robbing the bank, and a banker is shot in the process, which means it's a capital offense and they'll all be hanged.
Yeah, according to the elderly Russian nobleman, who is clearly not Russian, it's a hanging job now.
Yes. And we then see Blessington in handcuffs in a police carriage identifying Cartwright as the shooter. And Cartwright is screaming, Sutton, you're dead. But he's hanged, and the other 3, everyone else in the gang got 15 years apiece, except for Blessington, because he's the rat.
Yeah, when the not elderly Russian nobleman says it's a hanging job now, Cartwright says, only if someone squeals, and the camera pans to Blessington like, yeah, that'd be me.
Right. So it's 15 years later, less than 15 years later, they just got out, and it was in the news that they were released. And that was the newspaper that caused Blessington to panic and set up all that security because he knew they were coming for him. So
Trevelyan says, setting me up was an elaborate charade to save himself. I'm not really sure how financing a doctor would have added anything that Blessington couldn't have done on his own.
I think
in terms of security,
just to have some notable person in the house with him. I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird cover. It's a very weird cover.
It's a very weird thing for Trevelyan to have said. That's a weird logic jump to make.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me the two were unrelated.
Yeah.
But Blessington was obviously using his ill-gotten gains from the robbery, which I don't know why the police let him keep it, to set Trevelyan up and make even more money.
Maybe Blessington said, yeah, I don't know what happened to that money. Sorry.
So
what's going to happen to Trevelyan now that Blessington is dead? I hope Blessington made a will.
I do too. What we find out is the 3 remaining gang members have fled the country in a ship headed to Portugal. And a few weeks later, Watson reads in the paper that the ship has sunk and no one survived. So everyone gets what they deserve. Holmes is playing his violin by the window, and he is playing that concerto, trying to figure out the fingering. And it is irritating. It's genuinely irritating.
Yes, it really is.
And Watson wanted to spend the day writing up the case. And Holmes agrees to stop playing and asks what the title will be. And Watson says, I thought I'd call it the Brook Street Mystery. And Holmes looks distinctly unimpressed. And Watson looks suddenly very uncomfortable. I myself would prefer the resident patient, but don't let me influence you. And he walks away with his violin, muttering, the Brook Street Mystery no doubt would suffice.
No, it wouldn't. Use the resident patient.
And Watson goes back to his notebook while Holmes plays the violin from his bedroom. And we see Watson crossing off the Brook Street Mystery and replacing it with the Brook Street Patient, but he crosses that off too and writes the resident patient. And this is all happening as Holmes is finally working out the fingering in the concerto, and the music becomes significantly less irritating at that point. So yeah, everyone's settling back into how they're supposed to be a 2-2-1 beat.
Yes. And there are papers strewn everywhere. So Mrs. Hudson apparently gritted her teeth and cleaned the place up.
Yes. And you're right. We don't know what happens to Trevelyan after this. Conan Doyle apparently didn't care.
Could have spent his time writing stories instead of hooking up with bank robbers.
Yes. But I think, it's possible we're meant to understand that on the basis of this, he was able to build up his practice because
he would have built a reputation by then.
He had
2 years to do it.
Yep. And he was making money, even though it was just the 25%. He was still making money. So.
Right. And now he'll be able to keep all of it.
And he has the nice clothes that Blessington bought him and all of the equipment and everything like that. He might not have the house, but he's got everything else.
True. Could probably sell off the furniture before he stops.
Yes. Suddenly policing was not what it is now.
He could pull a Walter White. He had and start selling drugs illicitly. He had what looked like a pharmacy in the back room.
He did, yes. Well, that's where he got the poppers from.
Yeah.
He could go selling drugs to the yeah. Anyway. I like this one. I really like the scene where Holmes was prowling around the bedroom and like scraping ash off the dresser and plucking hair from the cane on the back of the chair.
Yeah, I liked the way they filmed the nightmare. That was actually quite creepy.
It was. Yes, there were all these coins in the coffin too. So it's clearly a guilty conscience.
Yeah.
A guilty conscience on multiple fronts, one for doing the job and another for betraying.
Yeah. But, there was no reason for Cartwright to have killed the banker. He just does it. Yeah.
And again, I mean, these comments about like, oh, the criminal classes are not what they used to be. I mean, that's forever and ever. That's true no matter what. Most criminals are dumb.
Yes, that's why they get caught.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll never know who the smart ones are.
True.
Well, unless they're...
Well, we're going to find out in a couple of episodes who the smart ones are.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Unless they're billionaires. But even billionaires are dumb.
Yeah. There was, when Holmes was there, Blessington was showing him a strong box saying, I'm not a rich man.
Mm.
Okay, by the standards of Jeff Bezos, you're not a rich man. But I couldn't afford to live the way you do.
No, oh my God, that bed was it was highly polished wood with all these grains. And I mean, it was it almost looked like marble.
Yeah.
It was gorgeous. And then it had this big tapestry headboard. Yeah, I was actually in awe of that, and the whole house looked
Yeah, the
amazing.
whole house was beautiful. I don't like the red entryway.
I
I would repaint that if that were my house.
actually, okay, so my living room is all red. My entryway is red. So that really appealed to me. And at first I thought it was a country house, another country estate.
Yeah, it does kind of give that look.
But no, it's just one of these big houses in Belgravia, or yeah, Belgravia, I think, not Marylebone. It's right by Grosvenor Square, which is owned by the Duke of Westminster. Their surname is Grosvenor.
Mm.
And the Duke of Westminster is like 12. He just got married, and he's the richest aristocrat in the UK.
Really?
Yeah, richer even than King Charles.
Wow.
Not as rich as Bezos.
There was something I don't know, maybe 10 years ago that Buckingham Palace needed a lot of maintenance and upkeep, like there
It
were
does.
leaks and such.
Yeah, yeah, and it's taxes that's going to pay for it.
Yeah.
The level of run downedness in Buckingham Palace is actually pretty epic.
Hmm.
There's a scene in The Crown where the Queen Mother and the Queen and Princess Anne are all each in their like individual domains, waiting for Charles to propose to Diana and call them and tell them what happened. And the Queen Mother's sitting in the main picture gallery, and a rat runs by, and to this day we don't know, because nobody's talking from the set, whether that was a real rat or whether it was just meant to evoke the decrepitness of this place where they have to live. Charles refuses to live there because Clarence House is much more comfortable. So he's still in Clarence House to this day. But the plumbing's outdated. The electric is outdated. There's water damage. It's just, the rooms where the people go to, the tourists go to look and gawk, those are kept up. But the private apartments, like you and I live better. So,
speaking of electric, getting back to electricity being used in private residences as of 1891, gaslight is very soft in comparison, and it's very dim in comparison to electric lights. So when electric lights first began to be used in homes, it was shocking to homeowners to see how dirty their homes were, because for the first time they could actually see things very clearly.
Yes. And because of all the fires inside, and a lot of them were coal fires.
Yeah.
People's houses were filthy.
Yep.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And it also doesn't surprise me. There's this Victorian emphasis on cleanliness because of that, in response to that. I do remember in Downton Abbey when they got electric light and Maggie Smith being all like, ugh, like it's still flaring. I can't handle it. And of course, there's that famous movie Gaslight.
Yes.
Which
if anybody listening has not seen it, go see it.
Go see it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good movie.
It takes place around this time.
Yeah.
As they're phasing out gaslight for electric. Yeah, this is a good episode.
Yeah, I enjoyed this one. This was a lot of fun.
I just, yeah. I was just, I think it was the, the interiors. I'm really starting to love the interiors and the set design.
I painted my bedroom walls. I sort of decorated my bedroom, having been inspired by one of the later episodes.
Nice. Nice.
I'll point it out when we get to it.
Cool.
But yeah,
Well,
the interiors it's so much fun to look at.
I know. They spend so much money and I love it. I mean,
Yes.
this is the sort of equivalent of like the Crown money, you know. There's so much money gets plowed into these productions and it's worth every single penny.
Yeah, it really makes you feel like you're there.
And makes you want to keep going back and watching again and again.
Yeah, because it really holds up over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I will keep reading Bending the Willow. It is so great. I highly recommend it.
I was looking for it, but it seems to be out of print.
No, I have it on Kindle.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
do
reading it
you?
on my laptop actually.
I
So I can make
I
notes.
do the lazy default of iBooks.
Okay.
It's not available on iBooks.
Okay. Yeah, it's I mean they talk about like the Reichenbach Falls and they actually did go to Switzerland for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Very cool.
And they talk about the stuntmen and everything like that. It's like in depth, episode by episode. It's so cool. And also, you know, talking about Brett as a person, he had a very complicated life.
Oh, yeah.
He has a son, David Huggins, who is a writer. I'm not sure exactly what he's written, but he's you know, he's had like relationships with men and women. He had emphysema, but he continued to smoke. Like towards the end of the series, he was on oxygen, but he was continuing to smoke, which is not at all a fire hazard. And he was on lithium for manic depression.
Yeah, that I know.
So we see by the end of the series, he's kind of getting a little puffier and puffier because of the water retention from the lithium. It's just, yeah, it's fascinating. They call him the ducal aquiline Jeremy Brett. And they were worried when they cast him that he was too pretty.
He's very striking. I don't know that I'd call him pretty.
Oh, there are photos of him as Hamlet.
When he was younger, yeah.
He was very pretty.
But not necessarily at this age.
No.
Again, he's very striking. He's handsome. He's not pretty.
Not as Holmes, no. No. He's elegant, for sure.
There was an interview that he had done, a TV interview that I saw, and he had a gold earring in one ear, and it really suited him. He looked kind of like a pirate.
I love that. Yeah, I know he kind of wore his hair longer when he wasn't Holmes. Yeah. Oh, I'm totally in love. I'm completely captivated. And apparently he was incredibly nice to the cast and crew. He would buy flowers for anybody, male or female, because he said everybody loves flowers.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
Including my cats, which is why I can't have them in the house.
But he was very thoughtful and always asking after their families and just making everyone feel really included in the overall production.
Yeah, I haven't heard a mean thing about him.
Nothing. No. Which is amazing.
Yeah.
Usually, yeah, someone's imperfect. The most imperfect thing about him was the manic depression, but he went and got help for it.
Yes. Yep.
And he was very open about it.
Good for him.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this episode?
I think we've covered it all as far as I'm concerned.
Okay,
so that's all from us this week. If you've enjoyed the show and haven't subscribed yet, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support us, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends. And join us next week when we'll be discussing The Red-Headed League.
Oh, love that one. I mean, I say that every time, but yes, love that one.
This is a particularly memorable one.
It is hilarious. Yes, especially if you like copying out encyclopedias. What do you think of the Hatton Garden heist as well? So we can talk about that.
Yes.
Cool. All right. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.